Hey y'all. So continuing with our series of looking at the production process for Alea City 1, my entry for ProcJam and 7-Day FPS 2018, which is available for free download on itch.io. And the source is available for purchase on itch.io, kind of an experiment. Let me know what you think. We're going to take a look at the lighting and post-processing and how that was achieved in the project, because I think those things are kind of interesting. It also uses Unity's HDRP beta. This is the 2018.3 beta. So some things will change probably over time, but you can get an idea of how to set it up and how the look was achieved, which I know took me some time. And so you may be interested in as well. So let's go ahead. I'm actually going to mute the game audio so that I can talk over it. Let's enter play mode. And let's actually not maximize on play. The menu's going to be a little messed up because we're not maximized. But okay. So the first thing that we've got is we've got this kind of stark black and white kind of lighting, which is coming from the directional light. And then, of course, there's this colored lighting throughout the level that we'll look at. But let's see. Let me run over somewhere and see if I can find a spot. Some glitches. Can we see the volumetric lighting? It's hard to see when it's so small. Let me actually maximize for a sec just so we can see some of the volumetrics. Okay, yeah, here we can see some of the volumetric lighting, right? Coming down through here. That cursor is tripping me out. There we go, click to get rid of it. And then, of course, we have these dynamic flying lights, and I'll talk about how those were achieved. But we can see in the center of the screen there, these kind of light shafts coming down, and that's achieved with HDRP. That's something that's actually built into HDRP now. So, okay, so let's look at how this was set up. So first of all, when you create a new scene with HDRP, you need to add what's called a scene settings object. And you need to add this by hand. You do this by right-clicking and going to, where is it, 3D object. Let's see, what rendering? No, yeah, rendering scene settings. And this will create a new one with this component. The settings are actually stored in a scriptable object here. So these settings will persist from play mode, which is nice. Let's pause. Oh no, unpause. Yeah, just get rid of that dialog and then Control-Shift-P to pause. Okay, so first of all, let's just make this much bigger. Okay, that's a little better. So first of all, let's take a look at, so if we turn off the volume, right, this is a global volume. This is like the post-processing volume, so you could have cube volumes that you can move between with these scene settings, which is kind of interesting. Okay, the HD shadows. Sometimes you need to move a frame in play mode. This is basically, we can see the shadow distance. If we make it really short, right, we have no shadows, 50, 500. So this is basically the shadow distance. I chose like 500 so that it would cover pretty much everything. The visual environment, this is important. So here, this is without the volumetric fog, right? So the volumetric fog is necessary for the light shaft. So if we turn it off, we lose it. So it's adding this kind of gray fog, which allows the light shafts to happen. This visual environment is there by default. I think the default is set to the sky type is like maybe the HDR procedural, and then you need to pick the fog from the fog type yourself. Now, the default, actually I'm not going to set this. I'll do it later because it's going to mess all my settings up. I needed to set this to none to have a solid color sky. It's just a white, kind of grayish white color sky. Turn on the fog type. And then the volumetric lighting controller is what actually controls the behavior of the light shafts. So what this does, we have the depth range. This is basically, if we make this shorter, it's hard to see this updating in real time, but this is basically, I'm pretty sure this is how far out we'll get the fog. I've got a setting of 900, and then the depth distribution uniformity, I'm pretty sure is the noise. So if we have it at 1, we have something that is quite simple. And then if we have it, I had it like 0.4, we get this more mottled. can get a better image of that. Kind of more mottled, noisy shafts. You can see it a little bit there. You can really see it in the scene view if you zoom out. Importantly for this look, the indirect lighting, I've turned it all the way down. Let's advance a frame. Okay, here, it's not being controlled here. I'll find where I set that. And then the volumetric fog. So the volumetric fog, you need to actually add this by going to add component overrides. I can't add it again, but you can pick it from this list and add it in yourself. And then the base mean free path. This was something that messed me up, and I'm pretty sure this is going to get renamed actually to something like fog density. But the default is something like 10,000 or something. It's really high, and it was confusing me. You need to turn it way down. You can see it's like progressive, so you can't like really see it in pause. But this is more or less corresponding to the atmospheric density. The more we turn it down, if I remember, the denser the fog gets, right? So if we want to really overdose on this effect, we could turn it way up, which of course in and of itself is interesting. I'm sorry, turn it way down. This means that the atmosphere is like super, super dense. And if we turn it way up, we kind of have something much more subtle, right? So I chose like a value of like 360. We can have this, the fog can be height based, right? So if I made it like 5, now we're not going to really see it on the ground, but the height, it's only like on the ground. I wanted it to be all the way up over the level so we get those high up light shafts, which is why I chose 100 units, right? Which corresponds roughly to about 100 meters. This baking sky, I don't know what it does, but I left it alone. Okay, so that's the scene settings, right? That's what you need in order to get the volume. So you need the volumetric lighting, the volumetric fog, and you need your fog type set to volumetric, and then set the base mean free path to an appropriate value. Let's look at the post-processing. So the post-processing, this is not a bad image to look at the post-processing. You can see some of the lights. Let's see if we can get a better shot that includes both. Because this was the tricky part of balancing this was to balance something that covered the black and white sections and also look good in the more indoor, kind of the outdoor and the indoor sections, right? So I am using bloom, auto exposure, which is supposed to dial up and down the exposure as we go from indoor to outdoor. It's relatively mild here, but I kind of tweaked it a bit to get something I liked. Chromatic aberration, depth of field is not in use. A little bit of grain, which I haven't used before, but I thought was kind of cool here. Vignette, color grading, and that's it. So let's go one by one. So first of all, very important, bloom, right? Bloom is adding just a ton of the look here. The feeling that the floating lights are, let's look at it first in this context. Let's look at the indoor setting for the post first. So the floating lights, the bloom is absolutely critical. They look so much worse without the bloom. This is what gives us the feeling that they're glowing, they're emissive. I'm using a pretty high intensity, 3.1. I'm not using a lens texture, like a dirty lens, because actually I think in this HDRP it was like a little bit broken. It was doing some kind of cool looking but weird effects. Auto exposure. So actually, yeah, so auto exposure in this case is damping down because we're indoors. Is that right? It's damping down a little bit here. So this, the exposure compensation is 0.75. I don't feel that I necessarily got this exactly right, but basically what it should do is give us a damp down the image, darken the image when we're outside, and brighten it when we're in here. I'm not sure if I used it correctly. Chromatic aberration, another huge one here, actually. Basically what this is doing is shifting the different color channels, and it's weird. It seems like it's turning off the bloom too, which isn't right. But we can really see this if we look at something white And if we look at it near the edge, if you look at the upper, I want to like point with my finger, but I can't. If we look at the upper right-hand corner of the image, we can really see the chrome abs working. We can see the separation of the red and the blue channels on that cube there. Or like anything white, you'll really see it. It's basically a lens distortion artifact. It gets more intense as you get towards the edges. This line is like a really good example. Like up in that upper right corner, you can really see that blue and red coming off of that little piece of shadowed white there. It's just a lens artifact, which ironically, look at those God rays, beautiful. Which ironically, real cinematographers would go to great lengths to eliminate, but in games we want to add it in because it makes it feel cinematic and camera-y. And just, I think the main point of all this post-processing is it breaks up the really clean digital image and makes it feel more organic. I think that's actually what we're all responding to here. Depth of field I didn't use. Grain, let's get an image with some variation in it. Grain. It's funny, again, it seems like it's turning the whole stack on and off. It's not supposed to do. Annoying. Let's turn off everything else. Something's going wrong there. Grain is fairly subtle though. It's basically adding a layer of noise to the image. This is not what it's supposed to look like. Something like, oh, there we go. Okay, somehow the combination of the, I think this is just some beta stuff here. We can see the noise there from the grain. Again, softening the image. I thought it was nice. I don't actually use it all the time. I don't always like the way it looks, but here I thought it was kind of cool. There it is with the bloom and the auto exposure. And then, let's see, I think it looks like I had the motion blur turned off. I generally like, oh yeah, because look at this. This is pretty trippy, actually. I thought this was cool for all you fans of Memories of a Broken Dimension. I kind of wanted to like do something with this because it looks pretty badass, but obviously it's an artifact. Super cool looking, but yeah, wasn't my intended direction there, so I took it off. It's probably just broken motion vectors in HDRP. Vignette. Again, it's doing this all or nothing thing. Basically what Vignette does, let's turn the intensity way up. It's just a, that's all folks. It's a Looney Tunes bubble. It just darkens in from the edges. I like this because it, especially in a first person camera, it draws the viewer's attention to the center and just, I don't know, well here, there we go. There it is without it. Heavy and with the bloom. It just adds something to me that enhances the composition. It kind of directs the eye inward and just looks really nice. I tend to use it pretty heavily on a lot of stuff. This used to be combined with chromatic aberration. You would do them together, but now it's separate. Then, again with this, color grading. So tone mapping, doing a lot here, bringing the color ranges down. I'm not really using temperature or tint. I'm doing some boost of the saturation, quite apparent there. You can see the colors look pretty washed out without it. Lowered the contrast. This was an interesting choice for me, but I really like the way it looks. It's making the bloom pop. I've never done this before. Normally I raise the contrast, if anything, but this is -20 contrast, and I actually think it looks really nice. Gives it this kind of washed out, like old movie poster kind of look that I really was into. Channel mixer's not doing anything. These individual channels, looks like they're neutral. Did I do anything with these? Oh no, yeah, I raised the gamma a little bit. Oh yeah, no, I did do something. Raised the gamma, basically brightening up the midtones. Quite a significant boost in the highs. And then, let me undo so I don't break my, there we go. and then deepen the blacks a little bit. So just darken the darks, raise the midtones, and a lot of boost on the highs. Again, let's just turn the whole thing off. Can we get it without losing all our posts? Okay, yeah. Well, that's the tone mapping. Doing quite a lot here, as usual, right? Color correction is always absolutely critical. Color grading to get a good-looking image. And it's something I think that if like you only spend time practicing one post-processing effect, color grading is like the hugest bang for your buck. It's also cheap processing-wise, so you could do it on mobile and whatever. It's a big deal. Okay, this video is going to be long. What do we, geez, 15 minutes already. That's okay. And then the last thing, so we talked about the volumetrics. We talked about the post. The last thing is these lighting panels. So let's get the scene view back so we can see it. So these are spawned procedurally. They're rectangle lights. If we look at one of them, display grid variant, was just frame selected. Here we go. So basically what this is, you can see there the meshes. What this is it spawns these display cubes. Each display cube is actually just a light. It has a, oh, those children could get deleted actually. It's just a light that is a rectangle light. Range is 40, size X and Y are 40. Set the color of the light that's emitted, which is fairly faint here, and then also the color of the mesh. Where is that again? I guess that's here. Let's see if I change it. I'm trying to remember. I'm still relatively new to these things as well. No, that's not it. There's a mesh. Oh, yes. Okay, so actually there's a mesh. Where is it? There's a choice to show the mesh. Where is it? Show additional settings. This stuff is new for me too. Oh yeah, display emissive mesh, right? So here, so this basically, oh there, now it recolored itself based on the color. So this uses, and interestingly, it replaced it with its own unlit shader, but I actually, for some reason, maybe as an HDRP bug, I don't know, had to put in my own just simple unlit shaders, just default HDRP unlit shaders into these slots to get it to render correctly. It was showing up as a broken shader, but basically we're displaying the emissive mesh, and then it is possible to make these volumetric. This is actually what this child does. You can have a spot now that's a box. Let's see if I turn that on for a sec. Yeah, you can see there. You can have a box spot. Let's see, will it work? This is on color. Let's turn up the range and the intensity, and we can see what it looks like. Oh, no, not the size. Where's the intensity? Here it is. Turn it way up. Oh, yeah, it's shooting through there. So this is actually really cool, right? You can see these things can generate this, can generate volumetrics themselves. Now, since I'm spawning so many of them, like in this one area, we've got 9, 15, 20 lights. Having them all going volumetric turned out to be too expensive for this. I might do something with this later where there's like a much more restrained number of lights. But it can make some really pretty stuff too. So this is an option as well, but in this case you need to use a spotlight, not a rectangle light, because rectangle lights are not currently supported by HDRP for volumetric. You can also see some weird glitching going on here, which is just I don't know there's some problem with HDRP, but it's still beta. So, and yeah, that's basically what we're doing. They're generated procedurally, and they're, in this case, they're using these rectangle lights and they're not volumetric. But I thought they looked nice and cool anyway. And they obviously cast light onto the nearby surfaces, which I thought looked really pretty. So we have this mix between this kind of hard lighting and then the soft gradient lighting from the internal sort of light sculpture things, which, somehow my settings got turned way back up. Anyway, so I thought that was pretty cool. So yeah, that's how I achieved the lighting and the post-processing in Alea City 1. I'm making the source for this available to download if you want to check it out and play around with yourself. It's going to be available for sale as a paid thing on my itch.io page. So if that's something that's interesting to you, go ahead and check it out. Yeah, if you have any questions, leave me a comment below. I'm always interested to hear from you guys. And thanks for watching.